Welcome to the Google Cloud Platform Education Series. My name is Jeff Davis, and in this session, we'll discuss building applications that scale automatically with Google App Engine. We'll be running a moderated Q&A during the session, so feel free to ask questions using the Ask Your Question Here field on the screen in front of you. Let's get started. So the format of this session will be, we'll start with a demo, and this is an in-depth demo of a relatively sophisticated application that will show the magic of App Engine in automatically scaling to meet demand, as well as how easy it is to manage your application once it's in production. Coming out of the demonstration, we will have a high-level discussion about the range of Google App Engine features and how best to leverage them. We'll take a few minutes to talk about where you can get more information online after this session. We'll talk about best practices for evaluating Google App Engine for specific use cases in your organization. And again, we'll be doing a running Q&A. Feel free to ask questions as we go. So let's cut over to a demo. This is a customer success application running on top of Google App Engine. We work for a company called BetterDev.io, and BetterDev makes, among other things, a video conferencing application. So here we have a mock-up of a video conferencing application, and users can perform calls. So this is a one-way call. You can actually see me in the studio right now. When they hang up, it's going to record information about this call into a back-end database. And what we're really interested in as a vendor is we want to make sure that we know all the ways that our users interact with our product. And then for each customer, we want to know where there are opportunities to improve their outcomes and optimize our chances at renewals and upsells. So here we have a customer success application. This is being used by BetterDev. They've actually bought it as a SaaS product from another company called Success HQ. But you can see this dashboard gives the customer success managers at BetterDev insight into their various customers. They have a list of projects here that are underway that they maybe should be paying attention to. They have upcoming renewals, and they have trending changes in usage and engagement with the product. So you can see, for instance, that the calls per week for Skills Feed, one of our customers, has gone up by 30%. If you click on any of these, you can actually get a dashboard that gives you a whole bunch of detail about how users within this customer are actually leveraging the product. So for instance, the Team Davis account, they've purchased 10 video conferencing devices to go with the software. They have an annual contract value of roughly $25,000 a year, and we can see the trends in their engagement with the product. So when I refresh the page, this is actually loaded live from the back-end data that's been recorded as users interact with the product. So we have purchased devices, registered users, percentage of devices provisioned, calls per week, stuff like that. Okay? Now, what a customer success manager would do with this is they would look for opportunities to improve the customer's engagement with the product. So for instance, first thing that we notice is only 60% of the purchased devices have actually been registered. We should get those other ones plugged in and going. We also notice that the calls per week is trending down over time. So this shows the last 30 days, and we actually want to boost this up, not have it go down. On the other hand, we can see that support ticket volume has gone down and end of call ratings are slightly going up. So those are positive things that we could bring up in a quarterly business review with the customer. Now, this is super helpful when running a customer success organization, and we want this application to serve our needs as we grow. As our customer success organization gets bigger and bigger, we want to be able to serve more and more users. And as we have more and more end users of our video conferencing product, we want all of that data to be able to be ingested into the back end and thus rendered in widgets on these dashboards without any operations overhead on our part. So let's take a look. All of these charts are being pulled out of a back-end data repository. We're using Google BigQuery, which is Google's petabyte scale, low-cost data warehousing solution. You can see that we actually have a table of all of the events. So we have the date, the type of event, whether it's a call or a page load or a comment or a dial-in session, who did it, what company they worked for, and then some other information. If you look down here at the bottom, you can see that we have 525,000 events have been recorded. Now, I was just doing one call at a time, and so that's writing one event at a time into this back-end data warehouse. But what happens if there are hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of users? We want to make sure that our application doesn't fall over, but I'm not a real expert when it comes to doing operations. So I would like Google to take care of all of that for me. And just to show that this is actually all on the up and up, let me go back and I'm going to bring up the Better Dev dashboard. And you can see that this is showing that we've done 2,600 calls roughly in the last week. If I go back to this UI and I do a new call, hi, and then I hang up, if I refresh this view, it should actually show 2633. So you can see that it updated. My use of the product flowed event data into the back end, and then that back end is being rendered in a nice visualization here. So let's take a look at the architecture. What we have here is customers. These are users of the video conferencing software. And every time that they use the product, it's going to write an event to an event API service. So this is an API, and it runs separately from the front end of the customer success software that shows the visualizations. And all it does is record data into BigQuery. Now, again, if we have lots and lots of users, we may need lots and lots of servers to catch all the incoming events and write those events into BigQuery. Then the folks who are using the Success HQ product, these are the CSMs, they actually hit a web application which renders the front end as well as all the data visualizations. And this front end can read data from a Memcache service, which is a stored in-memory data store that is shared across all of the front end servers. It reads and writes information about users and companies into Cloud Datastore, which is a NoSQL database. And it reads all of the necessary information to render the dashboard widgets from BigQuery. This architecture shows you one thing right away, which is that App Engine is a great platform for stitching together multiple backend services from within Google. So you want to use Datastore, and you want to use BigQuery, and you want to use Memcache, no problem. App Engine is a great place to stitch those together. Another thing that we'll see is I've actually broken my product into two different services. These aren't quite microservices, they're sort of macro services, but this gives you the idea that you can actually split your application into discrete components, and then we can manage those components separately. Let's take a look at what's required to actually put this all together in production. So behind the scenes, here we have App Engine. And you can see that in the App Engine console, I've got my two different services running. So I've got the API events service and the default service, which is my web front end. And you can see that I've got instances that are automatically running. So for the front end, App Engine is currently running two services. And if you look at the API events, you can see that it's currently running one service. What would be great is if when nobody's using either of these services, it would spin down to 0 instances, and therefore it doesn't charge me anything at all. But then I want it to scale up to dozens of servers or instances if the load requires that. And in fact, let's try that out. Let's just see how this auto-scaling stuff works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my SAS Growth Generator. If only it was actually just this simple to generate growth in a SaaS business. So I'm going to start with generating a low background load of new events. So this is emulating a bunch of people using the video conferencing product, and it's writing events into the back end. What I should see here, if I look at the events service, is I'm going to stay, you'll notice I've got 27 requests. There's a little bit of delay in updating this, but you're going to start seeing that those request numbers are going up. So it's 40 requests, 45 requests, 50 requests. and we're averaging fractions of a query per second. This is easily handleable within the single instance that we have running. So we can look at latency, we can look at errors, we can look at traffic or utilization, that sort of thing, okay? So not a ton of load. Let's go back to our magic load generator and say, hey, now we've got sort of product market fit, we've got 10,000 simultaneous users at any given time. I'm gonna click on this button. This is gonna emulate lots more users using the product, thus lots more events being written in. Now, I haven't had to do anything, but what we should see fairly shortly here is additional instances getting spun up because the queries per second goes up. So we can see it continues to go up. It hasn't spun up another instance yet. So far, so good. Well, let's just drop the hammer. Let's go straight to 1 million simultaneous users. This is a lot of calls on my API, clearly more than one instance can handle. Now you'll notice I've got 2 instances. And there we go. So now you see we've got 5 instances, and this will keep growing out as is required. So App Engine is using an algorithm of CPU utilization, memory utilization, and requests per second to identify how many front-end instances, or in this case, how many back-end API service instances I need in order to service all the incoming requests. Okay, so we promised you apps that scale automatically. Here you go, automatic app scaling. In addition to making it really easy to scale up or down depending on load, App Engine also makes it really easy to manage services that are in production. So let's say I want to actually release a new version of the front end. One of the things that I have found is some people aren't entirely sure what to do with this dashboard view. And I'd like to give them the opportunity to ask questions of the support team while they're using it. So I need to make a modification. What I'm going to do is switch to my code editor, and I'm going to integrate a third-party product. So this is a product that actually puts a little messenger box onto a web page and allows the end user to talk to somebody within our organization. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it into the customer view. What we're going to do is we're going to put that down here, okay? Now this is a new version of the application, so I want to update the versioning information. I'm going to say this is version 1-2. Now this is version 1-2 of the front-end web app service. Notice there's an API events service as well, and I'm going to leave it configured as 1-1. So because I have my app broken into 2 services, I can upgrade one component without touching the other components, okay? So now that I've got that, what I'm going to do is actually deploy the service. So here's my command line, and I'm going to switch into, let's see, Success HQ, and I'm going to deploy. Now this is all I have to do to deploy. So it's one simple command line. It's taking all of my business logic and all of my application code, and it's loading it up on top of the App Engine infrastructure. It's automatically creating a new version of the application front end, keeping the old version. So I have a 1.1 version, and you'll see that I have a 1.2 version running now. So what's interesting here is I go back and I go to versions, and you'll notice that for my API event service, I only have the 1 version because I haven't updated it. But if I go to default, you'll notice that there are 2 versions. You've got the big blue line down here and the big gray line down here. What this means is that all of the traffic going to my application is being served from the initial version. Currently, none of the traffic is being served by the new version. So we've actually staged this version. People can only get to it if they use a special URL, which prepends the version number. This allows me to test it in a production environment without actually having it be live to my end users. I can also choose to split traffic. So for instance, If I click on this and I choose migrate traffic, this will actually move all of the traffic from the old version to the new version. Or I can choose to split traffic, and this would allow me to say, you know what, I want 20% of my end users to be directed to the new version, while 80% continue to go to the old version. This would be a great way to test the efficacy of that new widget that we put in, which I'll show you in just a sec. All right, so let's try the new version. I'm going to click here. It's going to open a special URL, and you'll notice I have a new capability built in. This is asking me for a free trial because I haven't paid for this. But you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner now, I've got this messaging window which allows the end user, ostensibly, to talk to somebody on the back end. If I click through, you'll see that this actually loads on every single page. Okay, I'll dismiss the free trial thing. And it's having a little bit of difficulty pulling up the messaging, but you can see that the widget actually works. If I go back and I try loading the first version, you'll notice that I don't get the little plugin. So I've got two different versions running at the same time. And right now, everybody will be directed to the default version. If I want some people to try the newly installed feature, I can send them a special URL, or again, what I can do is I can do traffic splitting. I've been showing you this running in a canned version that I had already gotten up and running. What if I wanted to deploy this from scratch? You're like, Jeff, okay, it's really easy once it's up and running, but maybe it was really hard to get up and going in the first place. And again, not so. Let's take you through the process of deploying this from scratch. So I'm going to create a new project, and we're going to call this Success HQ 3, and we're going to bill it to my account. We're going to create the new project. Remember, a project in Google Cloud Platform is a collection of applications and resources that have a particular billing account and a particular security boundary. So I'm going to create a separate group of resources for this part of the demo. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new App Engine application. So I'm opening up the Google Cloud Shell, which is a web UI that has all the command line tools that I need to manage Google Cloud Platform. So I'm going to create a new application for this project. And it asks me where I want to locate the application, and I'm going to put this in the US Central region. So it takes just a moment to fire up the new application, but it's an empty application. There's no code there. So now I need to deploy my code. So while that's going in the background, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my code and I'm going to change this to be Success HQ 3. And I'm going to change this to be Success HQ 3. And now I've got a chunk of code. All I've done is one short command line in the console to create a new application. Let's make sure that that has finished running. It has, okay? And now what I'm going to do is I am going to deploy my application to my new project. So this is a first-time deployment of a brand new application. And I built this application on my local machine. I've got development tools that Google makes available. It's super easy to do. And once it's up and running, if I go through to App Engine, I should see the default service is there. I'm still waiting for the API events service to run. Okay, if I refresh here, okay, I can see both services are running. I can see that by default there are no instances because nobody has tried to access either one of the services yet. And let's try out the default service. Okay, so once the deployment to our new project is done, we should be able to click on this, and if all goes well, we'll see that the front end is actually up and running. You'll notice that there's no information for projects and renewals and trending because this is a brand new instance. There's no data in the data store. So we would have to populate the data, but we can see that it was actually as simple as 25 seconds of waiting with one command line to actually deploy and get the application up and running. So with that, what we've shown is that it's super simple to create a new project and deploy a new application, that application can scale servers up and down automatically based on load, that it's really easy to upload new versions and actually do partial releases of those versions, and you can easily segregate your services within an application so that you can sort of decouple the release schedule of the API for events and the front end for the end users. Okay, isn't that cool? Hopefully you saw something you liked. Let's switch back to the presentation and talk at a high level about the wide range of functionality available to you in App Engine. So as you've sussed out by now, App Engine is basically a magic layer of software that allows you to take business logic and some application code, upload it, and have it run with little to no operations overhead on top of Google's massive compute, storage, and networking infrastructure. You don't have to worry about defining servers, standing them up, tearing them down. You don't have to worry about replication, load balancing, any of that stuff. You can do all of this in Compute Engine, but in App Engine, it's all sort of done for you with a software layer that Google provides. Now, there are two different environments available in App Engine. What we showed you in that demo is what's called standard environment. And what happens in standard environment is you take your code, and when you deploy it, Google creates a containerized version of your application in a quite locked down and standardized container environment. They've got 4 separate runtimes that you can use with App Engine standard environment. There's Java, Python, Go, and PHP. So if you want to use another language, standard environment isn't going to work for you. Don't worry, there's another environment which we'll talk about in a second. But the benefit of having this really restricted, locked down container environment is that Google can then apply all sorts of automation and management magic to reduce the operations overhead on you. When you are using standard environment runtimes, you have access to a bunch of support services. So for instance, there's a service that allows you to send and receive emails from your application. There's a service that allows you to resize and manipulate images. There's an API, as I noted, that allows you to do a shared memcache across all of your auto-scaled server instances. These are all available to you. You can do all of this stuff without using the built-in standard environment APIs, but you would have to load client libraries and write a little bit more code. Now, the upside to these very tightly constrained standard environment runtimes is all of the automation magic that happens. The downside is they create some constraints which are unfamiliar to programmers coming from other environments. So for instance, you can't have background processes. You can't write to local disk. You can't install third-party runtimes. And all of your requests to your application have to return and complete within 60 seconds. So if you're a developer used to working in other environments, you're going to have to learn some new patterns to make your apps run in App Engine standard environment and take care of sort of all of the automation magic. Now, Google understands that for some developers, this isn't a viable solution, and so they've created something called flexible environment. And what flexible environment does is it gives you the ability to use a wider range of runtimes and to customize your own runtimes. So you have to do a little bit more work. You have to actually create a Docker file that describes the configuration of your container. It does allow you to do a variety of things you might want to do. So for instance, you can support additional languages. You can support Ruby or Node or .NET. You can install third-party binaries. You can do all the programming stuff that you're used to, like accessing the local file system, writing to the local file system, that sort of thing. You trade off, though, access to some capabilities in standard environment. So for instance, you have to do a little bit more overhead, defining your Docker containers, configuring your runtimes. Some of the APIs are unavailable if you're using non-standard runtimes, and you cannot host your flexible environment App Engine applications in Europe. You can host it in North America or Asia Pacific. You can access it from anywhere in the world, but you just can't have the app running in the European data centers. What kind of instances does your App Engine application have to choose from? So in standard environment, your App Engine instance classes range from the small end of 128 megabytes and 600 megahertz to 1 gigabyte of memory and 4.8 gigahertz. In flexible environment, you can use any of the standard GCE machine types. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the amount of processor and the amount of memory. In standard environment, you've got 3 types of scaling. You've got automatic, basic, and manual. So manual, you would choose exactly how many instances you want running. You would have to change the configuration file and redeploy in order to get more instances. Automatic will use that algorithm that we talked about, and basic is sort of in between. Flexible environment also offers automatic and basic scaling, but it does scaling the same way that GCE does auto scaling. So that would be based on CPU utilization or on like custom stack driver metrics. Billing can get a little complicated. I've got a summary here. I would suggest that you actually search on App Engine Billing Calculator, and they've got a fairly sophisticated calculator where you can type in all your parameters or run test loads and get an idea of what the costs look like. But basic thing here is for standard environment, you get billed for instance hours. So you have no instances running, you pay no instance hour fees. Instance hours range from 5 cents per hour to 40 cents per hour, depending on the instance class type. And then if you are using services, so for instance, if you're making calls to the Datastore or you're making calls to the image API, you may pay a fee based on X number of executions of the API. Flex environment pricing is comprised of an hourly fee for the number of CPUs you're using, an hourly fee for the amount of memory that you're using, and an hourly fee for whatever persistent disk you have associated with those instances. And then on top of these sort of instance charges, you pay for data store use and you pay for network egress. So any data that goes into your App Engine application is free. Any data that comes out of the GCP region, you actually have to pay for. And again, that's 8 cents to 11 cents per terabyte in North America and a little bit more expensive, say, in Australia or in China. We use the Google Cloud Datastore in the demo application. We use that to store all the information about the individual companies and the projects and the trending information and so forth. Cloud Datastore is a NoSQL document database that's designed to be very flexible. So it's sort of a schema-less data store, and it's also high performance. So you can scale to millions and millions of rows, and it performs quite well. It supports atomic transaction, high availability, so your data is replicated across multiple physical resources within a region. And that, as a result, what that means is that if a particular device goes down or even a zone goes down, your application is still available and your data is still there. Massive scalability, so as I said, really fast across many, many, many rows. Your data is encrypted at rest, and it's a fully managed service with no planned downtime. So you don't have to worry about a single point of failure. You don't have to worry about it being down Saturday mornings from 8 to 12 a.m. Google takes care of all of that for you, and your application runs without interruption. In terms of architecting your application, App Engine provides you a variety of features that allow you to be more intelligent in the way that you implement, deploy, and manage your applications. So we talked about services. The idea here is you can take a single application and break it down into 2, 5, 10, or more microservices. That allows individual teams to develop each service at a different pace, and you can roll those out at differing versions and differing times. Once you roll out new versions, you can roll forward, you can roll back, you can split traffic between those versions. What we would do at High Five, for instance, which is a video conferencing company that I used to work at, we would actually roll out new features to, say, 10% of the user base, then to 30% of the user base, and assuming nothing caught on fire and there weren't any screams, we would roll it out to the rest of the user base. If anything went wrong, we could simply roll it back to the previous version. Task queues allow you to offload longer running processes. So we said, for instance, that in standard environment, you have a 60-second time limit to return a response to the end user. What you could do is get a request from a user, return a response immediately, but put some long-running task on a task queue, and then that can run for 5-10 minutes in the background without problem. There's also a new feature that was rolled out just in February of 2017 called Cloud Endpoint Frameworks, and this is a mechanism by which you can expose APIs using Google's Open API Cloud Proxy. And this provides better security, better scalability, standardized interface, and automatically generated JavaScript clients that you can include in your applications to make use of your APIs. So, given all those capabilities, whether it's standard environment, flexible environment, whether you're using a backend data store of Cloud Datastore or you're using, say, BigQuery, the question that you want to ask yourself is, what can you do with Google App Engine? You may have heard of a company called Snap, previously known as Snapchat. What they were able to do with App Engine is grow within a few years from 0 to 700 million plus photos and videos shared every day with a very small development team and an even smaller operations team. They were able to focus exclusively on business logic and application functionality, and the scale just happened in the back end. You may have seen that they've made a forward commitment to spend $2 billion on Google Cloud Platform Services over the next 5 years. So obviously, it's a long-term bet for them. Your application probably isn't going to be this big, but one can hope. So let's say you leave the session today, and as you're working with App Engine, you have questions or you need a little bit of guidance on how to do specific things. Where do you look? So you start with search, Google preferably. And you can search for GAE, short for Google App Engine, and your topic of interest. So for instance, here we've got GAE versions, and the first link is a link to App Engine standard environment, and then you've got the ability to do deploying versions and so forth. There's also App Engine and your topic of interest. Sometimes GAE isn't sort of specific enough, and putting App Engine will work better. The documentation is a little bit different than what you have seen with other Google Cloud Platform products. So you still at one point end up with this nice table of contents, which has got quick start, how-to guides, API references, concepts, tutorials, and so forth. But there's a level of organization above this, and it would actually be helpful if I just showed this to you. So if we look at Google App Engine, I always start with search. I'm going to go to App Engine Platform. So this is sort of the overview page. If I click on View App Engine Docs, what you'll notice is it doesn't take me to the table of contents. Instead, it takes me to a table of contents that asks me what language I'm using. And they've actually got versions of the documentation for all of the popular languages. So I use Python primarily. So if we look at Python, then you have the next level, which is choose your preferred environment. Do you want flexible environment or standard environment? When you click here, this will then take you to the familiar table of contents section, but they have a different one of these pages and different subordinate sections for each combination of language and environment. So keep that in mind as you're looking around. Now, as you're considering App Engine for your environment, a few things to consider. One, follow a process. Figure out what it is you need to know in order to make a decision and what success is, sort of what threshold you need to cross in order to determine that App Engine is in fact the solution for you. Think about how you're going to test. Are you going to lift an existing application and put it in App Engine? The answer to that is often no, certainly not for standard environment, because there are a lot of structural changes that you might need to make. You could lift an application from a containerized environment perhaps and put it on flexible environment. But figure out what you're going to do. Probably something like a minimum viable product or a prototype of something new that you're wanting to build. Figure out who's on the team. You're going to need somebody to design the test product. You're going to need software engineers. You're going to need somebody to product or project manage the entire evaluation process, and then decision makers to whom you report the results and they help make the decision. Note, you need to be comfortable, or you need to get designers or developers that are comfortable in order to make this evaluation worthwhile. If you're going to get developers who are very entrenched in another development methodology and they're not particularly keen to learn how to work with App Engine's specific constraints, then it's probably not the right person to have involved in your evaluation, or that's not the right use case to attempt to move to App Engine. What you want is somebody who's willing to pick up the specific rules and patterns for designing and developing for App Engine in order to get all the benefits out in the operations side. Again, follow a timeline. So typically you can make an application that proves out how well App Engine will work for you within a month. If it's more complicated, it'll take longer. If you have more people, it'll take less time. And you want to break it down into 3 phases. There's a phase where you define your criteria and you recruit your team and you agree on your high-level tests. There's a section of time where you do some research, you do some point testing, you make sure you actually understand how App Engine works and how you're going to build your thing. You build it, and then ultimately you perform your tests, and you're testing probably for performance, you're testing for functionality and developer productivity, you're testing for pricing, and then you collect all of those results, you analyze them, and you make a decision. And hopefully this gives you a sense of all the things you can do with App Engine and how you can try App Engine out for your use cases to make a good decision. And that's it for this session. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you learned something and that you found it interesting and useful. We'll be sending you a follow-up email that has a link to a code lab so you can get some guided experience with App Engine yourself. We'd love to get your feedback, so feel free to provide that feedback on the screen, and stay tuned for our next session.